Thank you very much, Davide. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I think there was one of the remarks that Davide made in his intro that I want to emphasize the most, which is everyone have fun today and for the rest of the conference as well. So I think scientifically and content-wise and all of that, we have that sorted, but we'll try and keep the mood up. So I want to talk to you. I'm gonna take in the first session here, and the thinking Davide indicated in his intro. This is the bit where we want to get the clicker working. Forward, back. Okay, right. Well. Why do I? You got another one? Okay. Can I go back? Can't go back though. Man. Okay. So as Davide indicated, we've been running this. There's been versions of this event, this brain modeling workshop at HBM for as long as I've been attending HBM, which is longer than I care to think about sometimes. It's been a while, but the most recent reboot of that series has been Davide and myself at the helm, with a lot of other people doing the grunt work, providing the content, and we really do want to emphasize and think about the workshop today as part of a sort of growing compendium of resources, accumulating over the years. So that was something that we were, we've been thinking this all the way through. In the last 2 years, we were visiting various interesting topics, broadly speaking, in the connectome-based neural mass modeling side of whole brain modeling, which I'll explain a little bit more about in a minute. And last year in Korea, we were having a little chat after the session, like what should we do next year to sort of vary the theme a little bit. And the obvious one, actually, but I think it was Vic who suggested it, is we should do neural fields. Okay, and there's a few reasons why that actually makes sense. One is that we're in Australia, and there's actually been a substantial amount of contribution to the science of neural field theory from people from this land. And Australian-based scientists over the years, kind of in the past, in the present, and I'm sure in the future. So it feels kind of appropriate to do neural fields at HBM in Brisbane. But the more substantial reason why that makes a lot of sense is because if we think about a whole brain modeling or large-scale brain network modeling as a field and as a scientific endeavor, neural fields and neural field theory has been in it all the way. And it is indeed like an intricately intertwined part of the enterprise, but that's not necessarily something that everyone knows, at least people who aren't kind of in the weeds. So I feel like that's one of the reasons why it kind of makes sense for us to emphasize neural fields here in the whole brain modeling workshop, is to sort of communicate to the broader HBM neuroimaging and computational neuroscience community that neural field theory is very much part of and kind of an integral part of whole brain modeling and the exercise of computational neuroscience for human brain mapping. So that's the motivation. So what I'm aiming to do in this intro talk, the next 25 minutes or so, is give you a historical background and rationale briefing on the development and the kind of progression of some of the key ideas in neural field theory, bringing us up to the present day. So, customary caveats apply. Obviously, this cannot be comprehensive, So apologies to and if anyone feels like they've been left out or something absolutely critical has been left out. I've been selective. The rationale for the selectivity has been specifically. I think I have this here. What are we not covering? Yes. Okay. So my rationale for what what we're covering here, and more importantly, what we're sort of missing out, is here. So neural field theory, neural field modeling, is a large field. It's a large field of computational neuroscience. It's a large field of applied mathematics. It extends beyond. Importantly, it extends beyond whole brain modeling and human brain mapping. So the things that we're not covering are the kind of elements of neural field theory that don't really apply or aren't kind of centrally part of the endeavor of human brain mapping that we're here to work on at this conference, okay? So that means things like pattern formation. You know, this is one of the things that's been scientifically and theoretically interesting about neural fields over the years, sort of following on from Turing and other areas of science, statistical physics, mathematics that have just been interested in kind of pattern formation and complex systems. That is also one of the, if you like, currents of neural fields, more in the kind of applied mathematics kind of side of things. We're not really going to develop that much here, but you know, in another, say, conference, you might mainly be talking about that. Similarly, to some extent, the maths, like certainly in my presentation, I'm not going to go deep on anything. I'm really just giving you the overview. We have more of that in the next two presentations from Professor Breakspear and Professor Yersa, and I'm sure the speakers in the afternoon, Professor Robinson and Doctors Fogar and Wang, will give us lots of theory as well. But I'm not going to be too dense here. And the other area where neural fields are used, sort of in science, is more, so if you like, kind of cognitive science or cognitive neuroscience of information processing and you know, things like what are the computational capacities of those kind of systems. So that's also something that we're not covering. We're covering whole brain modeling, okay? And I'm gonna skip back and kind of come back to this now. So. Where were we? Right. So as I've been doing the reason why I'm here talking to you about this, you might say, why is John doing the history lesson? He's a young buck. He shouldn't be. He should be one of the slightly grayer folks doing that. Well, the reason is, I mean, I'm sort of interested. I do find it quite interesting to kind of study and learn about the kind of history of ideas in my field and in other fields as well, but I've also sort of done this already. I've done this already to some extent in this review article that was published a few years ago with my student Serenza and postdoc Neda for whole brain modeling in general. Okay, so in this paper, which I encourage you to have a look at if you're interested in any of the stuff you hear today, we sort of map what we call the past, the present, and the future of whole brain modeling in general. And the idea there is that the present starts around the early 2000s, when the sort of era of connectomics started. So that's some background reading if you're interested. Other background reading, so just a few selections for you here. My favorite actually is this review paper from Carsten Chow. This is an absolute goldmine of very readable but quite in-depth discussion of the Wilson-Cowan equations, which is as you will see, part of the landscape of neural fields. So a bit of reading suggestions for you there. Now I'm going to quickly address three questions, then get into the history lesson. What are neural fields, and what is neural field theory? So I think David emphasized a few times, like the key thing is like thinking about neural tissue as a continuous medium. That's like the one-liner, right? And maybe as a continuous medium as opposed to a discrete network, to just elaborate on that. And then there are certain mathematical frameworks that are sort of appropriate or indeed necessary for frameworks where you explicitly have space and explicitly have space-time. So really, like the composition of space and time and continuity as a means of understanding the dynamics of neural tissue is what neural field approaches and neural field theory is about. And things that come up are connectivity kernels, various kinds of dynamics like traveling waves, standing waves, oscillations, and potentially more exotic structures as well. So that's what neural fields and neural field theory are in a nutshell. What is whole brain modeling in a nutshell? So the broad, in the review article I talked about then, we talk about the sort of maturation of this as a scientific paradigm over the second and the first decade of the 21st century. And I think it's reasonable to say this is a kind of mature paradigm at this point. So the idea is that you take a reduced description of some patch of neural tissue, let's call it a neural mass model or a mean field model, put one of these simplified, coarse-grained, if you like, descriptions of neural activity into as a node, one node in a network with connections specified by some kind of anatomically derived connectivity structure. The point being, or the objective being, to describe and simulate and understand measurements that we make physiologically, typically EEG and fMRI in this universe, but not necessarily exclusively that, and sort of turn the numerical crank. So sort of plug these into this, simulate, generate these to try and understand these. That's whole brain modeling in a nutshell. So I've already gone through like what we're not covering. What we are covering is neural fields for physiological and whole brain modeling. So that's the concept of the workshop today, and that's why it fits into the series where we've covered whole brain modeling from different perspectives before. And from my point of view, the single thing I would just start with before I drag you back to the 1940s is there's sort of two flavors of whole brain modeling, or two ways in which neural fields and continuous representations of dynamics and connectivity come in to whole brain modeling. There's use of neural fields sort of as patches, where we have a local kernel, or if you like, a kernel with a spatially narrow support that's telling you about local activity, continuous dynamical activity in some patch of tissue. Okay, and then your second flavor is what we might call global kernels. Okay, and the point there that maybe is not super familiar or intuitive to everyone is that there's now going to become an interesting relationship, sort of bidirectional or symmetric relationship between macroscopic connectivity structure and the geometric structure of the brain bit that you're looking at. Usually we're talking about cortex, but we've got some interesting additions to that in the afternoon as well. So yeah, we're basically with neural fields in whole brain modeling, it's either local neural fields or global neural fields, and the global neural fields are sort of alternatives to a connectome, to put it succinctly. Okay, so we'll jump in on the timeline. I'm just gonna make sure I have an eye on the time while I'm doing the timeline, the actual time. Oh yeah, very good. There's a giant clock in front of me that I hadn't noticed. Okay, great. So let's start with sort of prehistory of neural fields. I've decided, in a similar way that I just decided that the present of whole brain modeling started in the mid 2000s. I've decided that neural field theory started in the 1940s. Obviously, you can choose what you like. But the point being, like in the 40s, we'll actually get to what was going on in the 40s in a second. But thinking about what the context is up to that point, right? So there's really two things we want to think about. What is the kind of state of the scientific understanding in neuroscience, and to what extent is there ideas coming in from physical sciences as well? So if you're a neuroscientist in the 1940s, firstly, you're not a neuroscientist, you're a physiologist, because the self-identification of neuroscience people as neuroscientists comes a few decades later. But you'll know something about anatomy, and you'll know something about physiology, which I'll call dynamics here. So we know from Cajal that we have these things called neurons. They're independent, so there's a network. There is a concept of a connectome at some level. There's some structure to this. You know, this is clear from Klinger dissections and things that are known from classical anatomists from going way back to the early 1800s. But there's a lot of randomness in connectivity as well. So and we'll come more to what's known in terms of the microanatomy in a slide or two. And all the kind of real elements of neuroscience today, they're kind of there, to be honest, in the 1940s. I mean, we know that the brain does learning. We know that plasticity is a thing, an important, responsible for memory. We know that damage to the brain in various ways causes pathology and causes cognitive impairment. That's a main interest. We know the brain is dynamic. Various people, Nobel Prize to Lord Adrian for characterizing the action potential, Sherrington as well contributing to that. So they did kind of the brain as an electrically excitable organ. Also obviously everyone knows Berger and the EEG in this room as well. You know, that was the 20s and the 30s, or if you like the 30s, where it started to get noticed. And epilepsy, I think epilepsy and sleep come in pretty early in the history of EEG, were recognized as potential clinical applications. So there's stuff known. And then thinking about physical sciences, well, at this point in the mid 20th century, field theory is a completely dominant concept in the physical sciences because they've been extremely successful. Most notably, electromagnetism and relativity, but probably at that point in the 40s as well, most interestingly, the development of quantum field theory and stuff in the quantum domain. But field theories are doing great in physics, so kind of a natural thing to think about it carrying over, and that's basically how things kick off, is people who are trained physicists starting to think about neuroscience from the lens of field theories that they're familiar with in other contexts. So in the 1940s, what are our starting points? There's a number of kind of lines of neuroscience, network theory, cognitive neuroscience, ML, AI. They sort of more or less trace their roots back to McCulloch and Pitts. Okay, I mean the actual work of McCulloch and Pitts is pretty weird if you read it today, but they kind of develop a sort of logical theory of cognition based on networks and the calculation possibilities of networks computationally. But this is the origin of like a network theory of cognition. And then over subsequent years and decades, that basically gets kind of elaborated into the domain of dynamics. That's how I would describe it. The first of these that I'm aware of, these elaborations, is this work from Schimble and Rappaport. So you see a statistical approach to the theory of the central nervous system. The two things that are two kind of concepts that are related but not identical when we're thinking about this area of computational neuroscience is population level descriptions as opposed to neuron level descriptions or element level descriptions. That's really what this idea of statistical means here. And then there's the kind of spatial aspect of statistical as well, which is related to the anatomical projections. So Schimble and Rappaport sort of felt like McCulloch and Pitts actually weren't really thinking about randomness sufficiently. They didn't think the idea, they didn't think it was plausible that genetics could specify cognitive networks sufficiently. There had to be some just contribution of self-organization. And I think that's probably most people working on this would agree with that at this point, but maybe that was a new idea at the time. Then, just fast forward a few years, there's this sort of back and forth, productive relationship, I suppose, between people who are thinking about anatomical connectivity and people who are thinking about dynamics. So in terms of the connectivity, there's two scientists in particular, Utley and Scholl, both in England, and they sort of combined basic anatomical work, tracer injections in cats and mice, studying usually a local part of the visual cortex or something like that, and sort of generalized some of the patterns that they were seeing to try and give some sort of abstracted general statement of how they think the nervous systems are organized in general. So the earliest kind of statistical physics analysis of connectivity structure, as far as I'm aware anyway, was coming from these guys in the late 40s and early 50s, and that includes the exponential distance rule. Okay, so the origin of the exponential distance rule is in Utley, and that's recognized by Burl, who, so then if you read a sort of shorter review of history of neural fields, it'll usually go Burl, Griffith, Amari, Nunes, Wilson, Cowan, and then lots of other people after that. So this is really, I describe it here like the beginning of neural fields theory, in the sense of like thinking about things like traveling waves and regenerating pulses in a continuous medium. One comment actually before, on the kind of previous slide that I find quite interesting is that the things that these folks are thinking about or citing as their kind of intellectual contributions, it's sort of a different universe to the universe of people thinking about ion flux across membranes. So as a computational neuroscientist in the 21st century, and I think probably in the latter part of the 20th century as well, the Hodgkin-Huxley equations are kind of the frontispiece, right? The RAL model maybe, like that's like the thing that everyone knows in mathematical characterization of neurophysiology, and that's for good reasons. So they had the landmark paper in '52 characterizing the action potential, a mathematical model of the action potential, and then Nobel Prize 10 years later. But the work went back into the 40s and the 50s. But it's really like a different crew who were thinking about what becomes neural fields than the people who are thinking about what becomes Hodgkin-Huxley equations and mathematical models of current flow across membranes. I mean, there's some intersection, for example, with this work from Utley. These guys worked at a radar research establishment, which is kind of cool. I guess this is sort of the post-war era carrying through. But you see, communicated by this fellow, Sir Brian Matthews. This was the erstwhile colleague of Lord Adrian, Edgar Adrian, who, as I said earlier, got the Nobel Prize for characterizing the action potential. This guy was the engineer who made the gear work in the physiology lab in Cambridge, where they figured out how action potentials work. So he's sort of there communicating, helping these anatomists communicate their work. He's also cited here, like, thank you for helping us out here. Burl is saying cheers to Matthews and Utley and so on. But broadly speaking, it's again like the people who are thinking about what becomes, as we move on, these field theories of neural dynamics are just a kind of separate group than those who are thinking about the ion flux across membranes, probably up and maybe that they kind of reconverge in the 90s, but certainly not before that. Like if you do the exercise I've done here, look at the reference list, and if you do that for, say, Wilson-Cowan, you don't see Hodgkin-Huxley anywhere. That's quite surprising to me. So Burl is the first person who sort of formulates a neural field model where you have traveling waves, you have generation of pulses, basically everything they've got. He's thinking about, let's see, learning, right? Kind of basically cognition, sequential regeneration of waves as a mechanism of memory, planar waves, waveform dependence, attenuation, lots of the stuff that we still think about and don't particularly understand. These ideas were there in the 50s, and they were carried forward by Jack Griffiths, no relation, in the 60s. This guy's an interesting character. He made a lot of contributions to a lot of different fields. He basically invented or discovered prion diseases, like CJD, and made a substantial contribution to the kind of modeling of DNA with Crick and Watson. But he's also a mathematical biologist. So the 60s, basically Griffith is picking up Burl and developing these field equations for neural nets. That's what they called them back then. Adding in some inhibition now, which was missing in Burl, and there's kind of stability properties that are Griffith's thinking a little bit more about. Okay, and then we get to the 70s. Now this is really where things really kick off. So again, if you read a shorter or you listen to a shorter intro to the background of neural fields, it will usually start in the 70s. It's the miracle decade for neural fields, really. And the main players there I'm summarizing here. So Amari, Nunez, Wilson-Cowan, and special mention to Freeman. Okay, so just briefly on each of these. Amari, I've given the 77 reference here, but he has some papers in 71, 72, 73, sort of introducing the idea. So he writes down neural field equations that are more or less the kind of canonical integral neural field equation that you'll see in textbooks today, and introduces variations of lateral connectivity, particularly this Mexican hat connectivity where you have a local inhibition, long-range suppression, so center-surround inhibition. So center-surround inhibition and just various aspects of the maths and dynamics neural field models, really attributable to Amari. Wilson-Cowan are very well known for their Wilson-Cowan model. This is not the Wilson-Cowan model. This is the extension of the Wilson-Cowan model into the continuum, spatial continuum, which was, so the Wilson-Cowan of the Wilson-Cowan equations, that's 1972. This is the second of the pair of papers, 1973, where they actually extend the Wilson-Cowan equation over space and study, in that case, the key thing about Wilson-Cowan is the way in which excitatory and inhibitory neural populations interact to generate oscillations and study the kind of phase plane dynamics of that system. That's one of the main things that, and also the concept of the mean field that's articulated by Wilson and Cowan. So they did the same thing with neural fields, so that's one of the earlier neural field models as well. And then the third one, actually both of these are in a sense like the more important ones for this crowd, this human brain mapping neuroimaging interested crowd. So Nunez has, it's the coolest of the names of these papers, right? The brainwave equation. I think we still call it the brainwave equation. It has a one-dimensional linear delay integer differential equation model for the EEG, and even at that point, 1974, interested in alpha and proposing that the Nunez model, or the kind of the Nunez theory from the Nunez model, which it has not received a huge amount of experimental support, but maybe still been on the cards, is that the alpha rhythm is generated by the long-range loops in the cortex, right? The kind of round-trip time of the cortex is the Nunez theory of alpha, and it sort of starts with the expression of the brainwave equation, and then elaborated in subsequent work as well for over more or less every decade up until the 2020s. So Freeman just kind of, this is a honorary mention, I guess, because there's no neural field equations in 2 minutes? 10 minutes. We started behind schedule. Yeah, we're gonna. Yeah, but thanks for freaking me out, mate. Yeah, 10 minutes. Okay, so so there's no neural field equations in Freeman, but there are. But he does articulate some of the aspects of the mean field formulation, particularly these concept of the wave to pulse and pulse to wave operators for essentially the input and the output part of a neuronal population response. That sort of becomes, I think, quite central to how most of us think about neural population modeling, and subsequently does this work on fields as well, but no field theory from Freeman in the 70s. So 80s, this was a term that I think Victor put out when we had a chat a few weeks ago. It's kind of a wilderness, as in there wasn't a whole lot of development in neural fields at that time, and perhaps attributable to the fact that there was a big interest in like chaos theory, nonlinear dynamics analysis of EEG data and so on. That's not quite so sort of trendy these days, but was maybe what a lot of people were thinking about. But there was some work going on in the 80s in neural fields. I'm not covering it all, but one of them is Nunez, keeping going. So Nunez's book, the first edition, comes out in 81, and that's the one that has this figure, right? And this is like, I think this is such a prescient image. It's a diagram, right? It's a hand-drawn sketch of just showing you. So this is a schematic of what a simplified cortex looks like if it doesn't have any folds, in terms of it being like approximately like a spherical shell with some fibers running around the interior and these cortical columns on the ribbon, right? Now, this is something that we use a lot in neuroimaging these days, right? This kind of spherical conceptualization of brain organization. Victor picked that up in 2 slides later, you'll see, but it started with Nunez, okay? This kind of brain as a sphere. Brain as a sphere kind of anatomically, and brain as a sphere dynamically, in terms of things like looking at standing waves and harmonic-like patterns in the EEG. So that was moving forward in the 80s. But the 90s is, I think, second to the 70s in terms of when things really get going, or there's a big move forward. So we'll call this the Renaissance. And yeah, I said I had a chat with Victor a few weeks ago, because I wanted to pick his brains about what was sort of the vibe at the time, specifically the time of the seminal work of Yersa and Harkin on a field theory of electromagnetic brain activity that was published in this, and then another paper a year later. And if Vic doesn't mind, I'll just sort of repeat the kind of message that I took out of that. The way Victor described like the approach that he took, or the rationale for the approach to develop, to moving forward the field theory of Nunez, essentially, was to take elements of Nunez, elements of Wilson-Cowan, elements of Freeman in terms of the input-output operators, and sort of stitch them all together. So in any case, so 90s we have, I think, 3 main developments. We have the work from Victor and Harkin, which there's several follow-ups that I'll get to. We also have Peter getting into the game, studying these, I guess what we now call the Robinson wave equation formulation of electrical wave activity in the cerebral cortex. And more from Nunez. This book has got a lot more than any of the other works from the 80s on the same articulation of the Nunez model. The part of Peter's paper that I've read the most is the appendix. So it has these equations for the green function for a sphere and for a 2D a 2D wave equation that's sort of the Bessel function like formulation. But what this actually gives you, if you think about it from a certain point of view, is like the connectome of the Laplace operator on this neural field equation. So if you as I indicated earlier, like I think one of the important ideas that comes through or should come through more to the neuroimaging community from the modeling community thinking about neural fields is this sort of symmetry, reciprocal relationship between wave equations respecting macroscopic geometry on things like cortical manifolds and the implicated connectivity structure of those partial differential operators. So you can find that info here. You can find it also in appendix of James's 2023 paper, which is my final slide that I'll get to. So we'll spin through, get us up to present day. So there's a few things actually sort of pick up more, as you might expect, with exponential growth of science and so on, in this coming into the 21st century. So I'm just sort of highlighting a few things now rather than trying to be in any sense comprehensive. On the previous slide we had the sort of Robinson model part A, which is the wave equation. And then a few years later we have Robinson model part B, which is the introduction of the corticothalamic loop as a model of the alpha rhythm, and also less well appreciated as a model of the evoked response. And this has been developed a lot by Peter and other people over the years as well. So that was the early 2000s. Related work from Carl Fristen's group, just in general with dynamic causal modeling for neurophysiology, but also in the domain of neural fields. Kind of give an honorary mention, but I don't have a lot more to say about it. But standing waves, basically from Jean Donizeau, and then like fully elaborated neural fields from Dimitris. And then the sort of we've got a sort of Yersa triple whammy coming up now. So building on the Yersa-Harkin neural field formulation, and I guess inspired by that shell diagram from Nunez, perhaps. Victor with colleagues of Fuchs, Kelso, Janssen made use of an early development in structural MRI, which is this thing that we do routinely. Not everyone did this routinely then. I mean, when I was learning neuroimaging in the late 2000s, not everyone used FreeSurfer. It was a pain. It took 2 days to run. But in any case, like this was something that came through in the late 90s as a way of co-registering people's brains. But what you get from it is this spherical mapping of the cortex. So Vic kind of recognized that this is somehow relevant for macroscopic neural field dynamics, and studied the properties of neural field models on a conformally mapped spherical domain to the cerebral cortex. And I think maybe one of the things that he'll emphasize is how he thinks this is insufficient as a representation of macroscopic connectivity, but I'll leave it to Vic to kind of tell us the full picture there. So I said triple whammy. Part 2 is 2-point neural fields, which I think also we'll hear from Vic. And And 2-point neural fields, so that's like 2 neural field patches connected by a long-range pathway, gives us the sort of the foundation for the TVB approach to neural fields, if you like, which is again to take a connectome and have some patches that are basically groups of surface vertices where you have some field structure, field dynamics generated by some local translation invariant connectivity structure on the field around some parcel, and then interconnect those parcels with long-range connections from tractography data. So that formulation was in place in the early 2010s, wasn't really used much, apart from Andreas Spiegler, who did some actually very good work on brain stimulation in humans and in mice using these quite large, numerically intensive computational models. This was done first by Bojack and Usendorp and co., the sort of use of the surface. And then the final kind of point in our trajectory here is the kind of return of the Robinson model, and by extension the return of the Nunes model. So this was work from Peter and Peter's group in the mid-2010s now, sort of taking the cortical surface geometry, finding its eigenstructure, and then using that as a basis function for a macroscopic neural field approach. So that was sort of reintroduced by Peter in the mid 2010s, and then one of the things observed by lots of people, including Peter, is like one of these modes looks like DMN, things like that. And then one of the sort of successors to that, and maybe the more influential ones at this point in this community, is the more recent work from James Pang and also Peter Breaky, Alex leading this at the back, is Robinson neural field models again, but sort of doing more with them. And the interesting thing, and the point that I'll leave you with now, is that maybe where we're at now is that the neuroimaging community is finally embracing neural fields. That there's certainly a lot of interest in this kind of work coming, I think, out of the building up, but particularly influenced by the contributions of James and so in this recent work. So I think that's where we're at now. I think where we are in a decade is an interesting question, and it'll be interesting to find out what people think is the future of the next 10 years. So I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot for your time.